The magical history of math magic blocks. Now, before we get started on this, I'd like to explain what I mean by magic. For me, in this case, magic is something that how could it happen? It's such an unlikely coincidence. And yet they all seem to be working towards math magic blocks, getting out in classrooms and getting kids excited about math. Just to sort of set the stage, let me tell you one that happened recently. I went out to a Northern California Math Council convention at Asilomar, and I rented a booth and was a vendor and almost made enough money to pay for the cost of renting the booth. But I'd never been out at something like this, and something had happened the day before I left, which was of no consequence. I've been teaching for 40 years, and a lot of times the name of a student just pops into my head. Matt Gibson was a kid who just drank his head off in high school and then became a totally serious study bug and went to the top of his class at UCLA. Bryce Lundberg was a funny guy back in 1976 when I started working at Bakes High School. And a couple of days before I left to go to the conference, the name Vicki Knoll just went through my head. She was a student in my physiology class at Lodi back in the 80s. I didn't think anything of it. I just think about my kids now and again. So I went out and I set up, and I was standing there trying to get people interested in these blocks, and this middle-aged woman shows up, and she says, weren't you my teacher at Lodi High School back in the 80s? You were my favorite teacher. You inspired me to go into teaching, and I'm teaching still 20 years later, and I love it. And I said, really? Because I recognized her, but can't remember her name. And she said her name was, and it was the wrong name. But then she said, oh, no, I'm married now. But before I was married, my maiden name was Vicki Knoll. What are the chances? So a whole series of really unlikely events have occurred. And I'd like to start off by talking about the very first one, which was the unlikely event that just in a flash of insight I realized how I could make math magic blocks. It happened at Lodi High School in 1982, sitting around my classroom after school one day. And I made a set, and they worked, and I put them in a box and put them on a shelf, and for 25 years, they just sat there gathering dust. And then, at the school I work at now, the AP chemistry teacher decided that she didn't want to teach AP chemistry anymore. And I realized that AP chemistry is an important science, and if we don't have it in our school, we're having a big gap in our curriculum. And I like chemistry, so I said, well, I'll teach it. Well, they took me up on my offer, but I realized, I don't know much chemistry. I took it in college. I took organic chemistry in college, but it's a long time ago. And the AP chemistry test is really famous for being difficult. In fact, there's a movement to make it be just the first semester of college chemistry, because to cover the whole year is really difficult. But I decided I'd do that, and they luckily, the administration suggested I go to a AP summer workshop so I could brush up on my chemistry skills. So I did, but before I left, realizing I was going to be the slowest kid in the class, I decided to take along my little, very dusty set of math magic blocks so I could show it off to them, and maybe they wouldn't think I was a total idiot. So I took them along, and about the third day of the conference, I busted out the blocks and showed them to them. And to my amazement, they were just so excited. Bruce, you got to produce these blocks. These blocks teach mathematics so well that my chemistry students will understand how to do the chemistry they need for math with the help of these blocks. So I thought, wow, that's pretty high praise. And so I ended up making math magic blocks because of that. It took quite a few years to get the full set together, but I did. And then I was worried that I might actually, it's a cool idea. Someone might steal it. So I thought I should patent this idea. But patents are expensive. Thousands of dollars to hire a patent attorney and whatnot. So back in my mind, I'm thinking, well, someday I'll have to fork out the money. I'm a lucky teacher because every year I get 2 class reunions. I get the 10th reunion, the students I had 10 years ago, and also the 20th reunion, and sometimes the 30th also. So I love to go to these reunions and see my old kids who are now, responsible, tax-paying adults and whatnot. Well, I went to my 10th reunion, or the kids' 10th, and I met a kid named Ryan who had been teaching physics, but he quit because he was just really treated poorly by the school he was working for, and decided to become a patent attorney. Well, when he said that, I thought, wow, I have this product. It's called Mathmagic Blocks, and I'm trying to get a patent for it. And I explained it to him, and he kind of understood it. And I thought, maybe I could show it to this guy's boss. And he said, sure, bring it on in sometime. Well, I took it into Andrew Fortney, PhD, and attorney also at law. Andrew's a really sharp guy. So I took it in to show it to him. Now, maybe I just don't understand the way it works as a patent attorney, but I'm guessing a lot of times it's pretty dry. You have to read and with a fine-tooth comb get everything just right because you're patenting something. A lot of money hangs in the balance. Well, Mathmagic Blocks was a really fun, creative, exciting thing. Andrews lit up when he saw this thing, and he ended up saying, I'll patent it for you for free. Well, sounds good to me. So he wrote up the patent, and we sent it off to the USPTO in Washington, D.C., and awaited the, acceptance of the patent. Well, Andrew called me a couple of months later and said, they rejected the patent. There's already been another patent for this concept. And Andrew was mystified because he had done a thorough patent search before he even spent all the time writing the patent. But it turns out that there was a guy named Lynn who had come up with the patent first. And Andrew found out about that when he went and talked to the patent examiner. So he came back and he studied the Lynn patent and realized, wait a second, this is bogus. So here's Lynn's patent. What he has is a balance, just like my balance. And instead of having a 1 and a 2 being the same size, a 1 is like this, and a 2 is 2 1s glued together. So 1, 2, all the way up to 10, you can visually see that. So it stops short of requiring that students have this abstract understanding. You can tell that this is bigger than this one because it's bigger, but it's a level of abstraction to know that this is bigger than this one. So what he did was he had these balance and he had these blocks, and then in the actual patent application he has a picture, and it helpfully shows that 2 plus 3 equals 5. And he actually has a picture of the 2 block and the 3 block, and then he shows that on the other side of the balance there's a 5 block and it balances. Okay, sounds good. Kind of a no-brainer, but that's an important thing to do. But then on the next page, he says, and you can do multiplication too. And what he does is, he says he has a picture of a 2 block and a 3 block, and he has an X in between them. 2 times 3 equals 6. Isn't that great? 2 times 3 equals 6, except you're adding the weight of the 2 block and the 3 block, and they don't weigh 6, they weigh 5, Lynn. So he had this bogus idea of multiplication and addition with the same blocks. The USPTO didn't see that it was bogus. They awarded the patent to this guy. And so therefore, we can't patent the idea. And they don't even appreciate the brilliance of Mathmagic Blocks. Well, Drew was upset, to say the least, but he doesn't take things lightly. So he said, I'm going to fly back to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to visit with that patent examiner, and I'll explain to her, I'll just show her. So I took my Mathmagic block set, which was still kind of dusty, but blew the dust off, gave him a scale, he got in the plane, flew to Washington, D.C., and then he sat there, and in front of her, he put a 2 block and a 3 block on one side and showed that it didn't balance with a 5, it balanced with a 6. And 2 and 10 is 20, and over again. She wouldn't back down. I mean, no matter how many times he showed her, how many times he had her manipulate it, she still said, no, 2 times 3 equals 6. Lynn's patent holds. And I think that the reason is that she knew that if she backed down, there'd be a lot of work for her, and she'd have some crow to eat as well. So she was just hoping that if she stuck to her guns, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It doesn't hold water, but that's what I'm sticking to. That maybe Drew would just fly back to California and forget about it. Well, he did the first half, but he didn't do the second half. He wrote an appeal, and this appeal it's the funniest thing I've ever read. If you've ever read a legal document, a dense legalese, I mean, they just go to all kinds of length to make something totally clear. And for you and me, it's totally cloudy because it's so totally clear. Well, what this thing does is it takes the reader and it just beats him over the head over and over again. 2 plus 3 is not equal to 2 times 3 because 2 plus 3 is 5 and 2 times 3 is 6. Can't you see this? Over and over again in the most polite legalese you can imagine. Well, he wrote up this document, the appeal, sent it back to Washington, D.C., and they had to admit that they'd made a mistake. So they did award us a patent. And the patent they awarded us is number 8591234. Now, the meaning of that, 8591234, might be obvious to you, but if you take a look at my website, or if you buy a set and look at the instruction manual, you'll see why that number is the only number that we possibly could have had awarded to us as a patent number for mathemagic blocks. Now, if you end up playing with the blocks, and you end up coming up with a way to figure out not just the addition, but all the multiplication blocks, including x, y, and z. If you can figure out what z is, then maybe you should go and work as the head of the USPTO. They need someone at the top. But I need to warn you about this z block, because I took a set over to a friend who has a business in town, and he has a bunch of guys that are doing trust analysis and placing orders and whatnot. I mean, these guys use math every day. I set it up on this front desk around 4 o'clock. Well, they all gathered around, like 5 of these guys, and they spent an hour and a half trying to figure out what the z block was. I mean, they were just totally sucked into this thing. They almost got it, and they had, a great time. I mean, Tom, the leader of the company, was, "Bruce, what are you doing? These guys are on the clock, and they're not working for me, they're working for mathemagic blocks." We had a good laugh about it. But if you can figure out the z, then I say you should feel as proud of yourself as a kid who's figured out that 1 plus 2 equals 3. You're just at a slightly more advanced level. So mathematic blocks history, of course, refers to all kinds of things. The next chapter is with a guy that I met at a party who made armor. I mean, like medieval armor, like shoes and breastplates and helmets and everything. And he goes to assemblies and gives talks and have the kids wear the armor and bumps over the head with a mace and whatnot. It's a lot of fun. He loves it, and it's a popular assembly. Well, he was telling me about this and explaining how difficult it was to hand work all this metal. And I said, "Well, Everett, why don't you just come down to my classroom? I have a metal chop saw, I've got a MIG welder, and I've got a plasma cutter." And he said, "Really?" So he came down and spent 8 happy hours one Saturday doing all this stuff, and afterwards he was just so grateful. It's like I saved him a month's worth of work. He said, "Anything I can do to help you, let me know." Well, guess what Everett's business is? Internet marketing. So I was able to set up an appointment with him, and for free he explained the ins and outs of website design and all this kind of stuff. So another magic moment. To be followed by something I put on Facebook recently about trying to upgrade my website. And sure enough, one of my students, Adrian, chimed in and said, "Hey, I run a website business. I'd be delighted to do your website for free." So that's almost the last story. But